Hey friends, I'm Maxwell Freud, a queer Minneapolis-based board game designer and the host of Hatch This Way, a limited audio series where I chat with other queer folks in the tabletop industry to learn all about who they are and how they contribute to the hobby by being their authentic selves. Today, I'm chatting with my friend, Matt Molandes. Matt, how are you doing?
Doing good, doing good.
Real quick, tell everyone about your titles and various roles you play in this industry.
Sure thing. All right, so I am the community manager for Brotherwise Games, the community manager for Grail Games, community manager for Maple Games, and then I do US communications briefly for Matago, and then I handle all of their customer service for all of those. And then my main title is with Colossal Games, where I am the marketing manager, Kickstarter campaign manager, community manager, social media manager, customer service manager. Basically, if you have interacted with Colossal in some sort of way in the last 2 years, you have interacted with me. So that's typically where I land. So yeah.
So you're full-time, like in the industry. This is your life.
I came from the escape room industry of over 10 years, almost about 10 years, and just some stuff with small businesses kind of fell out during COVID that I wasn't able to let go. And so I decided to quit during the pandemic and start looking for new jobs. And crazy enough, I made a manifestation in 2021 of January, and it said, I will work in the board game industry. And within 3 months, I had both jobs at Brotherwise and Colossal. So it's been a blessing. It's been overwhelming. I have learned so much, and I'll continue to do so because this industry just is ever changing.
That's awesome. I work for one company and I can't imagine that many different company emails assigned to my name. That sounds stressful on its own. So hats off to you for doing all that. That's amazing. So just so you know, I use he, him pronouns as a default. I don't actually care that much, but I always say that because, that's
Yeah.
easy. How do you identify?
Yeah, he, him, um, primarily. Also very just queer. I don't really identify as gay or pan or anything, just queer, just part of that umbrella that I'm proud to be under. I think it's interesting enough. I think younger me would identify more as homosexual, but now as I've gotten older, more mature, more wiser, I've learned that I'll date anyone. I just typically like to make sure they're under the queer umbrella because I think that is an important part of my identity and an important part of the identity of people that I look for as well.
So do you appreciate it when people ask your pronouns or ask how you identify and questions like that?
So I do. I appreciate it when people do, but I love it when cis het people do because to me it's just an effort that isn't necessary, but it does show allyship a lot of times when it's taken seriously. So if I have an email from a pitch proposal or something like that, and at the end it says their name with their pronouns, even not knowing their identity truly, but just seeing that makes me feel so much more comfortable because I think it's just an important part of people now, and I think it's something that to make everyone else feel comfortable absolutely should be included in emails, and not so much in face-to-face conversations. I just try not to use those pronouns when face-to-face, and then in emails I'll use they and them, typically, almost exclusively, even with he, him, or she, her. I just think it's easier and makes the email a little less exclusive as well. So
I think one thing that the only time I'm bothered is when people assume like straight as the default, where I'm in a room with a bunch of straight people and they don't like they sense something, they get a vibe, and then they try to probe around without asking me directly. Like, so do you have a wife? Do you have a girlfriend? So do you have children? And you can tell there's like this hesitancy in their voice. I'm like, you can just,
yeah,
I'm wearing a mask that says Twin Cities Gay Men's Chorus on it. Like, you can just ask about
yeah.
things. I don't know. That's me personally. I would almost just prefer if someone's like, "Oh, do you like tell me about your partner?" Or I don't know. Like,
No,
I
I definitely
I don't
agree.
know.
I definitely think we need to normalize the just the openness of it, because I think as much as we start, working on inclusivity with the queer community, it's also the same. I love when I see like straight men wearing nail polish, because it's kind of just breaking that boundary that's kind of been set up that just says, you know, if you are a man wearing nail polish, you must be queer, you know. But really it's so punk rock, and I just I like it when we start blurring those boundaries of identity, like public identity. But I agree with you. I think when I'm in a room or like social function and someone is asking, it's kind of the same thing with my polyamory. People love to know about, oh, okay, you have a husband, but I also saw your husband's name is John, but your partner's name is Jake. And I'm like, yeah, that's two people that I'm currently in a relationship with. And I would rather it just be about curiosity than about like probing a person to see like, oh, okay, this is now what they identify as. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing
Mhm.
if you're just curious on a general level of curiosity, but when you start then using those things to then weigh my identity, now I'm kind of like, why? What's the purpose?
Yeah, I think the more I think about it, if it makes sense in the context of a conversation, I would almost just prefer you ask like, "Oh, are you queer?" or something like that. Preferably, it wouldn't be a big deal. I don't know what the
Yeah.
perfect solution is there. Like, I'd rather you just ask me than ask around it in a weird, like, assuming way. Is maybe what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And then
No.
also, if you do ask me and I'm taken back by it, don't get offended when I'm also asking, well, why is that important? Because it is kind of that same side of the coin, you know, the other side of the coin. I don't want that to be something that I'm constantly have, like, even in these kind of interviews I'm constantly thinking, oh god, should my voice be deeper, you know, is it going to resonate with more than just queer people because I have a higher pitch voice, you know. So it's all those kind of things that I think we're getting there as a society. We're really starting to kind of open up the ideas of what gender expression is and things like that. But I find it endearing when my straight friends like to, you know, probe into my life of queerness, because they don't have to take that path at all. But, you know, I think maybe a lot of times people could be like, oh, hey, I think that person is handsome. Does that make me queer? No, it just means you think that person is handsome. Like, it doesn't, you don't have to already figure out all of your life with just one question that you may have about an attraction to a same sex person.
No, for sure. So you mentioned being in a polyamorous relationship. Can you talk to me about, if no one knows what that means or they don't really understand it, how would you define that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is too with polyamory, it also kind of depends on just your boundaries. I'm a person who believes that monogamy is not for me. Also, we have to look at polyamory and monogamy on a marriage perspective as well, because polyamory, of course, being, you know, illegal in all 50 states. I cannot marry two people under the religious setting. Now, I can say that I'm, you know, in a group relationship and a partner couple relationship, and that's fine. It's just under that umbrella, you cannot marry two people currently. But I have a husband of 4 years, and I have a partner of, oh my gosh, year and a half now. 2 years will be later this year. So yeah, it's just kind of, it kind of fell into it. I wasn't necessarily, me or John, my husband, weren't necessarily looking for anything like that. But we also believe that our hearts are big and too big for just one person. So it's the hardest thing I've worked towards, and it's the most rewarding thing that I've worked towards too. I definitely, it is not for everyone. I am a poly advocate, 100%. I have talked with so many friends who are also poly, or and not necessarily even queer poly, you know, cis het poly, all of that kind of stuff. You know, it really is more so based on your beliefs. And if you don't believe that, that doesn't, if you don't believe in my polyamory, that doesn't make you a bad person. It's not for you. You know, I think that's kind of an important part too, is it's okay if it's not for you. You don't have to strive to get to a place where you're okay with it, because you don't have to be. All I ask is respect, and that if you see me with my husband or my partner, you know, just make it aware that you are, you know, what's going on. Because the last thing I need is those questions like, oh, you're married but you have a partner. Like, Yes, and I don't have time to explain to this grandma. Like, just move on.
Does he know?
Although, actually, to that point, my entire family, all three of our families know very much that we are all together, and they are very supportive and open arms. And in fact, next week we're going to my partner's family up in Georgia, and then in a couple weeks we're going to Destin to be with my family on vacation. So it's been nice because as Southern as all of our families are, to have that openness and maybe not even acceptance, but just kind of like, it is what it is still worth it to me. I don't need you out at the parades. I just, it is what it is completely fine with me.
Yeah, I had to look it up because I was like kind of prepping for this, and I was like, so what's the
Yeah.
difference between polyamory and like polygamy?
Mhm.
And the definition I found is that polyamory just means multiple romantic partners,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Whereas polygamy is specifically marriage. So you're saying, I thought there were states where it was legal for like polygamy.
Unless it's changed, I think 48 of the 50 states possibly are I think polygamy is fully illegal. I don't know a single
Huh.
state where I can marry, because that would be quite something. I'll have to look into it, honestly.
I feel like there are polygamist families out there. So how do they do it? Is it just unofficial or?
Unofficial. And if you think about marriage, I mean, I can, if the time comes when we want to commemorate that with our partner, it wouldn't be in a religious setting. It wouldn't
Hmm.
be on an officiant, like, paper legal setting, because a lot of times, when even for a queer person, even being able to marry, you look at really what does it stand for. Before we could get married, we still loved that person. Before it was even legal for us to get married, we would still commit our life to those people. So what changed when we could get married? And really, it was just finances and taxes and insurance and all of that kind of stuff. So, when the time comes down that I or we all want to commemorate that, then yeah, we'll have a ceremony, have a big party, have families and that are open to that, come on over and celebrate that with us. But I can definitely say there are plenty of people who are polyamorous who don't identify as polyamorous because of the weight that the title has. A lot of people are just in an open relationship or closed relationship with just a third person, and that's essentially, kind of, again, all based on those people's beliefs. I started my polyamory journey about 8 years ago, but with John, my current husband, like I've had many of them, whatever. My husband now, we started as open polyamorous, and now we are more so closed with just a third person involved in our relationship, and it's an equal. We call it ourselves tripod, where everyone is kind of equal on that playing field, because there is a lot of polyamory groups that have pods. They have those branches. They have two people who are together who then have boyfriends or girlfriends, and then those people also have boyfriends or girlfriends, and that's a lot. So we just keep it really casual with just three people. It's like a slumber party every night. We play video games and fight and argue and go out to eat, and it's just always kind of nice having someone always there to talk to or open up to, and just get to know. So
No, for sure. What's the response you usually get from people when you tell them?
um a lot of that, actually. I've noticed with my friends now, there is no hesitation at all, you know, but we are still trying to build up and progress from previous generations. And those people who, again, just want you to be happy, but don't quite understand. I get a lot. What I honestly get a lot is, oh, well, I'm glad it works for you. It could never work for me. Okay. That's completely fine. You're absolutely right. It may absolutely never work for you. And you're very valid in your monogamous relationship. And I wish you all the best. It's just not what I'm looking for. In the same way that it doesn't work for you, my lifestyle, your lifestyle doesn't work for me. And honestly, I've not met a lot of resistance to the idea. I think a lot of people, when they hear how successful and on the front face of everything, my relationship is beautiful, but we still argue, we still fight, we still cry. Like, it is still a integral part of the relationship. And I think because people see us so happy on social media and things like that, they immediately think like, oh, then there's three of them, so they must be doing something better than my failing marriage, you know. But that's just not the case because, you know, I don't typically show us crying on social media. So you're always going to get that front facing, you know. So I
Oh,
think the best advice I can give anyone who doesn't understand it but accepts it is just that. That's completely fine. You really don't have to, and I wish you all the best in your monogamous marriage or your monogamous, you know, closed relationship. I'm sure you can be just as happy as I am. There's just really no set rules, and I think that's kind of what I love the most about it is there is no set rules.
yeah, I think there's always this initial kind of fear response whenever like a cishet person hears about a queer identity where they jump to, well, does that mean you want everyone to be that identity? Like, oh, I'm gay. Well, am I gay? Is everyone gay? Oh, they're a trans person. Is everyone trans? Are we all supposed to be trans? It just jumps
Yeah,
into like this binary other, like, oh, well, then you want everyone to be that way. And that's not it. That's
right.
no one is trying to, you know, yeah, it's come
Yeah.
up. It's a common theme that's come up is um, people just tend to like blow it up out of fear instead of just accepting.
Oh,
It's just a few people who want to live life this way.
we're even seeing it now, you know, and I try my hardest not to get political, but sometimes our identity, you have to, because we weren't
Mhm.
given the rights that cishet people were given. You know, marriage has always been legal. It's only been legal for us for what, 7 years, 5, 7 years.
Mhm. Yeah.
But you're seeing it too with the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. I am not trying to convince your straight kid that there is other ways to live. All I'm trying to do is protect the gay kids from the school, you know, and things like that. I really don't care what anyone else is doing. I just want to protect my community. And that may sound selfish, absolutely, but it goes to say I'm not out to take away everyone's rights or anything like that. I all I want is to protect my community. And so I think a lot of times when people hear, you know, trans issues and things like that, they immediately have to insert their identity into that discussion. And that's just not the case. And it's not necessarily something that needs to happen. All we need to do is be mindful and listen. And I think that's sometimes where it gets hard because when you start realizing that your past, you have not been an ally, and now you're having to hold yourself accountable, that's a vulnerable place for anyone to be, is to realize, like, oh God, like I've not been the best ally. Let me definitely change that. Let me definitely try to be that. And we're seeing it in the board game industry too. You know, there's been a lot of resistance to include a lot of things, and a lot of publishers, you know, we're trying our hardest to do it where it's not also part of the blueprint of the games as well, because that's the last thing we want. We would hate for there to be 7 cishet characters and then that one token gay character, you know. So if it makes sense in the game, okay. And a lot of times it does make sense in the game to have these, you know, varying pronouns and varying, you know, people of color and queerness all attached to it. But it is very obvious when some companies do make that kind of decision and it is just a tick off a box type thing, you know. Okay, well, we've got the gay character, we've got the person of color, okay, we're good, we won't get in trouble. But we see that too, you know. And for someone who works in the publishing industry right now, a lot of what I'm trying to change from the companies that I work for are just even the small innocent things like the he and her pronouns and rule books and things like that, you know, making sure that even in our Kickstarter campaigns, that it's equally diverse, or that if I've had Kickstarter video trailers, it's, you know, some women in there as well. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that makes our industry so much more accessible to so many more people, and that's exactly what it should be.
Yeah, if I watch your Kickstarter video and it is just completely filled with straight white people, for as far as I can tell, it to me that's a great indication of the people who went into making the game and produced the game and are selling the game. I'm like, well, I don't see myself in your friend group, so
Yeah.
How, like, what guarantee am I that I'm going to see myself in this game? Like, why do I need to back this?
Yeah, it's definitely hard because there are times where I can't make those changes with some of the games that I work with, but I'm not trying to have that voice where if I don't have it this way, then I'm off the project, because this is a very large hill that we're climbing, and as long as we just keep climbing it, I find that beneficial. And there are definitely times where I've had hard conversations with my publishers and the people that I work with. Not even a hard conversation like this is what y'all are doing and this is what we need to be doing, but just to show like, hey, there's other ways that we can approach this, you know? And I think that's important because I'm not trying to change. Even the people that I work with are so loving and they are all allies. I literally I will go on record to say that every single person that I have had the opportunity to work for in this industry, even if they have not been the best of allies, they are willing to learn. They are willing to sit down and have that conversation with me and us move in a better place, such as the he, him, and she, her pronouns and rule books going to they, them, or also saying player one or player two. You know, getting rid of all that together, those are things that publishers are becoming more open to because it's being brought to their attention, you know. And I'm so proud of a lot of the people that I work with that are marketing managers with me. A lot of them are queer, a lot of them, if not, are the biggest allies. And I think that is the shift that is starting to happen, because the bigwigs and these publisher companies are not as bigwig as I think a lot of people. They're just literal nerds who play board games. Like, no one in this industry started off by saying, let me manipulate the board game industry and make millions of dollars. They all started because they love Cluedo and Monopoly and Trivial Pursuit and, you know, all those games that we grew up with as kids, you know. So I think that's important because I'm not, and no one should be trying to change the world in one day. But as long as we constantly keep making progress, then it'll be worth it.
Yeah, and I'm on the same page too, where I don't need every game to have a queer character in it. Like, that's not realistic or necessary. I just want to know that you've been mindful in the production process of, were there opportunities that we could have made the game more inclusive in some way, and did you take them, or did you just take the road of least resistance? I just called up all my friends who just happened to be all white and straight, and because it was easy, I just used he him pronouns because it was easy. You weren't mindful, you didn't make
Yeah.
any effort. That's all I really want to know. Is like, was there effort, was there opportunity, did you try? That's really, I
Yeah.
think, all it takes to move that needle, that little extra step, is just to be mindful about it.
Absolutely. And I do think we are moving towards that. There has been a lot of resistance to keep it the way it was. But even some of those people who maybe at the beginning of last year were very resistant are starting to change their ways because they are starting to have more conversations and are starting to open up to that idea. But we also have to realize we're dealing with a very Western approach to things where, you know, the Eastern part of the world, they have maybe not in the sense of understanding maybe the conciseness that we in the Western world are like with he him pronouns, but they also are like, oh well, we've been doing that for forever, or you know, it's not a big deal to us. Well, okay, it's not that it's a big deal, but we are wanting to make strides to show that effort. And my teams, my international teams, a lot of them, until I've been able to sit down and write massive emails about like, hey, here's how this could affect us if, you know, blah 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 blah, it seems like again everyone's open to changing, but the Western approach I think is a lot more aggressive and a lot more, it needs to happen and it needs to happen now. Because I've been honestly very nervous to have talks with my international team members because I just don't quite know if the way we live in America is the same elsewhere when it comes to that social justice and that kind of stuff. And then to find out that it is very much the same, maybe a little bit more lackadaisical in the sense of like, we're not here to call to action, we're not here to take action, but you know, of course, you know, I got hired as a openly queer person, and I can't say that would have been the same thing 10 years ago. So I think that's important too, is just always being patient. And I sat down with Madigo for the Captain Sonar rule book, and I said, hey guys, there is a lot of he. It's just he. But let's just change that to they, them, and player one or player two. And they were so open to that. I was like, man, this is awesome. Like, this is that progressive change that you can make. And I think patience is the biggest word, because it's not that anyone is resistant, but they just need maybe more time to process those kind of things. And unfortunately, social justice, with especially with queerness and people of color, you know, up until just a few years ago, even as a person with massive privilege, I truly thought I was an ally to those people, who those minority groups. And then to think like, oh God, I've done literally nothing to help these people, and these minority groups. And you start kind of realizing like, oh, like, geez, I really do have a lot of privilege. And that really wasn't the case 2-3 years ago, until it got really pushed into the forefront of the industries. And I'm so happy with being in an industry that is trying its hardest to move forward, with some speed bumps along the way, for sure. I also don't remember your original question. I feel like I've derailed that. So,
No, I think
uh,
I loved all that because it's a good segue into my next question, which is representation. So, where did you first learn about, let's say, polyamory? Because we were talking about that. So, where was that representation that you like maybe saw yourself? I don't know, in the industry or just in general, I think.
yeah, in general, what's really crazy, and this kind of just goes to a little bit of who I am. I have, and I'm very open with this, but I've been going to AA meetings since I was 8 with my family. My mom's second husband was alcoholic, and so we had been going to AA meetings, and there was a two two people there that had they were married, and they also had boyfriends, and I wasn't even openly queer at the time. So for me, I just saw so much in this group of people. And it was honestly the first time I never thought that it was anything other than just them loving. I didn't think that it was out of the ordinary. And then when I strangely enough grew up, probably about 10-12 years later, there was a documentary on polyamory, and I was watching it. I was like, wait a second, like, that's what those people were. I just thought it was so normal. And then I really kind of started diving into it in college, where I just realized like this whole idea of, for me, again, I'm not judging people who have issues with that, but for me, the whole idea of like flirting with someone, in this digital age, Snapchat can be just as dangerous as Grinder, something like that.
Hmm.
But if it's not something that can be dangerous and you can trust that person, then it can work. You can see yourself in those situations. And so that documentary, gosh, I don't even remember what it was called. It really kind of opened my eyes to like, oh, okay, there is definitely more than one way to go about this. And for someone who struggled for so long, because honestly, a little anecdote, I only came out because I started paying attention to statistics at a very young age. And the statistics from where I grew up, 1 out of every 30 um, kids, one of them would turn out to be gay. And I'm looking at all of my high school students, all my friends, and I'm like, well, none of these, it's going to be me. Wasn't even having thoughts or anything. I was just statistically like, okay, well, this is going to be my luck. Um, and then read a book called The God Box when I was younger. Really good book, just kind of struggling with like religious identity and sexual identity. And kind of just put it into perspective for me. I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much more sense now. Like, because it just carries so much shame. And I think the same
Mm.
thing with polyamory. It's the same thing. You just feel, until you have found your community of people, that this is a shameful thing. Like, you're once again going against the norm. But yeah, I finally stopped letting that bother me and realized like, hey, if what I do is for me and what other people do is for them, good for them. Like, that it is what it is. Um, but yeah, I've not seen it in board games, honestly. I think honestly one of the first real big push for queerness in board games was Nikki Valens' Artisans of Splendidville, where it was
Hmm.
the first time where I backed it positively queer, and I was so happy. Before that, I think what is it, Deep Water Games, people who made Welcome to
Yeah, Deepwater.
Deepwater. In their second one, Floor Plan, the characters had different pronouns, and I was
Hmm.
like, this is so cool because it's not, again, anything that has to do with the game, but it just a little identity for someone who wants to, help that player's contract out or something like that. um, but Artisans, I think, was really the first one just recently where I was like, this is so cool. And to see that much support for a game that is so proudly queer, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to play that one. um
And then I think before that there was like Gladius. Is that right? Gladius, I think is the title of it.
yes, yeah,
That was like a very diverse. I don't know if they were like blatantly um queer per se, but it was a very
yeah.
diverse in terms of at least like visual representation.
Yeah, I think it's also, again, it is somewhat of a challenge because you don't want to make it part of the game. And then there are
Yeah.
certain games that are the identity and the blueprint of it is part of being queer. I've got this like drag queen card game. I
Mm.
honestly don't even know who made it, but it was something that I was like, oh, that's a queer game. I'm definitely gonna buy it.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and I think that's just a bias. I if the game is good or not, I really don't care. But just to have more diversity on my shelves, I think is important. And honestly, kind of what I did in the industry just recently in the past couple of months, when I look for board games to buy, I really do try to expand my collection of diversity with designers and artists. And not just that as a hobbyist, but as someone in the publishing part of it, I now look at pitch proposals and I say, this really is a great game, but let's find an artist who can equally match the quality of the design, but let's make sure it's inclusive. I and it feels threatening to say that because I'm not denying straight white cis het men a chance to bring their game to our table, but at the same time I do like to find ways to uplift and highlight and celebrate um, you know art and design for people who maybe are a minority in the industry as well. And it always feels really good when I could at least say, you know, I don't know if actually any of our titles are designed by women, but a lot of the artistry is. And that I
Mm.
am very proud of for kind of also not necessarily pushing, but just really vocalizing that I really like these artists and let's work with these people. And Beth Sobel is, and Jackie Davis, and
Mm-hmm.
two people that I work with a lot, and a lot of the publishers that I work with, and I just so happy when I get to work with them. And I think that's kind of really important too. Is just because I'm very excited to work with anyone who'd be considered a minority, I'm still equally respective and excited to work with straight white cis men too.
It's not that zero or nothing thing where it's not,
Yeah,
I only
exactly,
want this in everything. It's, we just want an equal opportunity or an opportunity.
exactly.
It's like, be aware of it. Again, it's like, are you literally only signing games by straight white men? Is that
Yeah,
all? Are you just working with straight women? Is that your entire team? Do you think maybe there's a way to branch out? Do you think maybe you might be a little biased? Are you just not considering something? I mean, that's,
yeah.
at least ask the question.
I think it's important too because every publisher is there to make quality games, and I would never put someone's identity as the reason why their game may not be of quality for us to sign, and
Mhm.
again, a game can be fantastic and we still may not sign it. But one, it has nothing to do with your identity. And two, it really has to do with just what our catalog already has. So I think all that is really, really important for anyone who is looking to pitch their game. It may not, you may get six no's from different publishers, but it doesn't mean they're bad games. um, and I don't like that kind of virtue kind of signaling too when someone, I don't know, that's kind of hard because I kind of do actually. Like if what's a game, Corrosion, all the characters were women. for Capstone Games, and I was like, "This is awesome! Like, how cool of a design element for these to all be women." And it got kind of a lot of backlash. Like, why is it all women? But to me, I never once thought like I needed anything else. And I think that kind of has a double-edged sword where a lot of times we look at games, and if a game is being pitched and it's all straight characters and the designer's straight and white and the artist is white and all of that, should we be looking for more or let it contend as to what it is as well? And I think that is the hard line for a lot of publishers is we look for inclusivity and diversity, but it has to make sense. And really that's the takeaway for the whole thing is it absolutely has to make sense to it, because I don't want to be a Disney Channel where you just melting pot put everyone in there just because that's what the producer wants to stay out of trouble. Like the same thing with board games. We really don't want to create games with any type of character unless it makes sense to put them in that story. But I will say, let's also start creating games with that in mind already. Because the last thing I hate to do is look at someone's beautiful game and then say, okay, but there's no, it's just all white people. Like all your characters are white. Can we change these characters? Does it make sense to change them? So yeah, that's I can really go on all day about that and really talk in circles, because what it really comes down to is it's got to make sense, but we do need to strive to include that sensical attitude about it in the core design of the game, not 3 years later when you've pitched it to a publisher and it's not already there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think my only yes and to that whole thought is yes and, but if your, let's say, current catalog only appeals to straight white men, I think it's worth looking at your catalog as a whole and then saying, hey, are we actually making games that appeal to a diverse audience? Or are we just we know our straight male demographic, so we're just going to make games for them and your game doesn't fit? And I think I've maybe run into some of that. It feels like we're like, oh, this isn't a good fit for us. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But I didn't make games for straight families. I didn't design for me and my wife and my kids. I designed a game I could play with me and my queer group of friends, and we would feel included and seen, and we'd have a good time. That was my instinct. So if you're not designing, I don't know, if your catalog only appeals to straight white families, then maybe it's do you need to look at your catalog and say, hey, are we actually doing everything we can to make games for everyone? Or are we just making games that we know a specific group of people will buy and calling that, using that to justify our decision making?
Yeah, I really think, and you just said it perfectly, because I think a lot of times, and I use Artisans of Splendeville as an example, that is mostly majority queer characters. I don't actually know if there's anyone who's not queer in that game. Where is the market for straight people? Are they also going to buy that game? They can't resonate themselves. They can't see themselves in those queer characters, but would they still have fun with that? And I think that is such a beautiful risk that I'm so happy that that's Renegade. Yeah. Renegade. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm so happy they took, because it also was to show hey, this game, if it was all white characters, may have made 4 times the amount, but that's not what we're here to do. This isn't trying to be that $1 billion game. It's just a game that shows a different, a different side of someone's identity. And I will be very interested in to see how many straight people play that game.
Well, I think even so, even if that game maybe would have made more if it had more straight white characters in it, maybe that's the case now. I want to know what's the long run effect of that. Could that more diverse version be more profitable in the future? Because I don't want to design for what's going to make me money right now. I want to try and make designs that will push the needle so that those more inclusive designs are going to be the more profitable option one day. I think that's a better goal to have, not, maybe not the safest financial goal, but in the long run, I think that's the better investment.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I'm going to design for what's hot now, what's going to sell right now, as opposed to, I want to produce a game that's going to sell long term. and be a
Yeah,
staple, like a cultural staple, as opposed to what's the hotness for the next 30 days.
that's a really good point too. I wonder, when we look at games that are objectively queer, um, what is the longevity that they have in the industry as well? Because I also kind of want to play devil's advocate and say, if a game's design and blueprint is as solid as it is, and no identity was represented, would it still find itself on as many tables? Or do we as gamers bring games to the tables because it's what resonates with us? You know, and I think that's kind of interesting too, because it kind of goes into what types of game mechanics you like to play. As I'm Colossal is all about area control, and I love that. However, it's not a design element that gets a lot to my game. And I wonder, if you were to create an area control game with queer characters, would it feel more accessible to me? Would it feel like I can digest this in a way that, if it didn't include identities of any sort, would it be as important for me to get it to the table? And I think that's an interesting kind of way of looking at it too, because if that's the case, then the games that get to my table, if I was to take a photo of every game I play at my table and say, this is my personality, it would make all the sense in the world, but then I look at those kind of elements, like if I was to like area control and I only like area control, then I take a 9 picture collage of all the games I played. Would that be my personality or the other person's personality? And I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. I personally think it may not be a better financial option to include objectively queer characters in the sense of where the industry is, but we have to make these strides now. Otherwise, they're going to be erased. They're going to be pushed away. Publishers are going to say, oh, well, look, that straight game made 4 times more. We're going to go with that. No, we have to defy those. We have to say, no, this is the new normal. Case in point with Western Legends Big Box, my team, we sat down. Well, we had a discussion with the artist and said, we really want to include people of color and make the cover as diverse as possible. It was, of course, already something that Roland was absolutely doing. We just wanted to kind of echo that as well, because, even on those strides of not a game design, but just a box art, it matters. And I think in some ways we will get to a point where inclusiveness, without it kind of disrupting the flow and it just be more organic, will become the new normal. I just think right now we kind of like, and I bring back artisans, if a straight person picks it up, are they immediately the same way if a straight dude paints his nails? You've already got that pre-consumed like notion of like, oh, well, this person may be gay if they're playing this game. And that's just not the case, It's just another person's story that I want as many people as possible to enjoy.
Yeah, I think even if the game is like an abstract, let's say there's no human representation in the game itself, I think it's important as a company to ask, did I have diversity on the team involved in the development of that game? Like,
Yeah.
did I get it in front of different types of people? Like, outside of actually having queerness in the game itself, was there queerness under the engine? I think that's
Yeah.
also worth asking when you're deciding what game is profitable or viable or worth investing in. Is asking who was involved when it was being brought to life, just to make sure it's getting like, is it actually, are you asking all the right questions?
Yeah, kind of like a credibility thing. Like, maybe the game at the very end, fully production copy, didn't have queer characters, but it might have been something that was at least discussed and not just erased or hidden away. And I think that's important too. If a character is queer or even a person of color doesn't make it into the final game, at what point as a publisher do we announce, well, we had that discussion, I just want there to be more of that understanding. And I think I have a question for you. Would you, if you found out that you got hired because you were a queer person, would you be, because we talk about like, oh, well, you're only hiring me because of this or that, but would you still be proud for that opportunity to have your voice heard? Or would it come off as more like, oh, this is just exploiting my identity?
It would depend on the situation. It would are they actually asking for my thoughts and opinions and listening to them
Yeah.
and implementing them is one question. Whether, like, regardless of their intentions when they hired me, I think it's more of, well, what do you want to do now I'm here? That would be my bigger
Yeah. Yeah.
takeaway from it. That would tell me if you employed me to check a box or if you employed me to uh, utilize me for my unique perspective.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting because I kind of came into this industry. I adore the brothers at Brotherwise, Johnny and Chris, and they have constantly been in those strides as two, cis white men in an industry that they recognize needs to be more inclusive and diverse, but they're also two straight white men, so
Mhm.
how much can be done? And I have just applauded their efforts of, you know, I would never say I got hired because I'm queer, but I do think that it sometimes comes as a benefit because now you do have the opportunity to start offering, different opinions and kind of push back on some things that maybe didn't have any resistance before you got hired. And I kind of take it with pride. Before, when I wasn't out and just barely coming out, I never saw myself as prideful. And now, as someone who is, as I've said before, aggressively queer, it is something that is now important to my work. I do try to, if not even queer representation, but just representation of any other kind, just to see it through and to have those discussions. And again, maybe nothing changes on that next game that comes out, but my team had those discussions, and that's where that progress is really going to start.
Awesome. So I think since we're kind of in the realm already, we'll just transition into, I don't know, the more fun part of
Yeah.
the interview where we just talk about, you mentioned how you got into the industry kind of. What got you interested in the hobby initially though?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I grew up. My mom and me, or mom and I, when I was younger, we collected Trivial Pursuits, and I actually have about 30 different Trivial Pursuits of different genres and decades, and it just became such a fun thing. And then we transitioned that into collecting all the thematic monopolies that came out, and just that kind of thing. But I didn't really start into the industry until about 2012, when I think I was playing things like Small World and Settlers of Catan, of course. Pandemic was one, and I know what so many people say say this, but Pandemic really opened my eyes to what design means in this industry, and it wasn't just around a board with some dice. And very valid. Also, I hate when people are like, "You can't believe you want to play Monopoly." Monopoly is a sound design. It's a smooth design game. I mean, it's a very take that, but it's still at the core of it has some great game mechanics that I think should be celebrated, instead of kind of looked at like, we don't play Monopoly in this household. Like, okay, but it's still a good game. But yeah, getting into the industry, I've been sober now for 5 years, and it really was kind of the start of my sobriety, because I think I started, well, on the front face of things, I started aggressively collecting board games as just a way to curb my addiction. I mean, from one bad thing to excessively buying a bunch of board games. I always joke with my mom about it, because I went from like one board game to 300 over the course of 30 days. And now I have like 900 board games. Which I only this industry I'm proud of to say that. You talk to anyone else and they're like, you have 900 board games? Oh, okay. But yeah, I got into this industry as a way to kind of cope with my struggle with addiction. And since then, it's just now taken off to a hobby. I don't even get to play that many anymore. I just like collecting them. They're just pieces of art. This is well, you can't see because we're on a podcast, but in my office, I have just wall to wall collapses of board games. And when I walk in, I don't get overwhelmed. I just think like, oh my gosh, this is someone's hard work that I now have collected. And just it's really cool to see that grow.
Yeah, it's just supporting the industry that you work in. I think it's just
Yeah, yeah.
it's art for sure. What are some of your favorites? You can break it down by category, however you want to break it down, but just tell me some of your like top.
Oh, number
What's it?
one, Quacks of Quedlinburg. I mean,
Okay.
there will be people, if they listen to this, you can come on my Twitter and we will fight. I am the number one Quack stan. I also, right now, I am really enjoying role player adventures. My squad really is enjoying the campaign element of that. And what else are we playing? We're also playing. I love the initiative. Another really fun one. I like anything that again kind of throws out what we know about board games. And I find myself liking the more casual games, but then I still also love things, of course, like Gloomhaven and let's see, The Lord of the Rings from Fantasy Flight, the app assisted campaign. Mansions of Madness, of course, being another. But I do find myself now working in this industry. I typically want to play things that evoke any sort of resonating emotion. So John, my husband, he loves playing parks, but he also grew up in New Mexico. You know, so for him, visiting these parks around the states is something that kind of brings it back to his childhood, and we play that a lot just as a chance to kind of learn more about him and his journeys and past experiences. And then I, again, with Quacks is just my number one to play. But I also feel like Quacks is one of those games where you look at it and it's so intimidating. And any age, whether young or old, you think to yourself, oh my gosh, there's no way I could ever learn something like this. And then you play around and you start really understanding the mechanics and the gears are starting to turn. And then all of a sudden, you're not only having fun, but you're feeling confident. And a lot of times when I play games with people who don't play board games, that's what I look for. I look for games that could really boost that level of self-esteem and confidence, because really that's all it is. We look at games so seriously, like, oh my god, I could never play this, this rule book is huge. But like, spend the time, have patience, learn it. And you know, some games maybe are for you and others aren't. And again, I think that's kind of what it comes down to. If you're not someone who likes a lot of tactical games, this industry has plenty other genres for you. What about you? What are some of your favorites?
I don't know if I have like a top. I kind of go off art a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
When I like playing by games, if I can enjoy looking at the game, I generally enjoy it. Period.
Isn't that interesting though? Because I could never say a board game is invalid, but for me, as probably wonderful Twilight Struggle is, could never play it. Could never play it because I just do not resonate with that design. And I'm sure the artist is wonderful and I very talented. But yeah, I probably shamefully do judge a board game by its cover. Um, Especially it's so funny. I do not like chess at all. Um, cannot get into it. Have tried several times to get into it, but bought Pandasaurus's That Time You Killed Me, which is 3D chess. Have not played it, but needed to buy it and own it because that artwork is absolutely stellar. And again, it'll
Mhm.
probably be not one that I probably play, but just to have and feel so proud and to have that art on my shelves is just honestly just as much worth it as the design element is.
Yeah, I will. Same. I have Grimslingers on my
Mm-hmm.
shelf, and I played it one time with one of my best friends, and we set it up, played through the first scenario, and I was like, I don't love this gameplay.
Yeah,
Honestly, I not not for me. It's not my favorite thing. I didn't like the combat system at all, but I'm never going to sell it because it's so
yeah,
gorgeous.
yeah,
It's just I'm like I just want it. I want to know it's there so I can look at it if I'm sad or something and know that there's beauty in the world.
Can we also normalize that like for creators and for anyone kind of public facing in this industry, if you don't love a game, it still does not make it a bad game. And so many people when they review games, especially, and anyone listening to this who is a content creator, please know that as publishers, we literally spend hours out of our weeks watching y'all's content. And a lot of times we listen to that harsh criticism, But the one thing that I would suggest is, even if you don't love it, still offer positive and negatives, because someone listening or watching you may love the things that you don't. And I think that's so important, because I do not believe that there are bad board games out there. I just don't think that maybe some of them are as digestible as others.
Oh, for sure. I do a lot of play testing,
Yeah.
and I always try and give feedback that's constructive. And I'm like, you could do this thing.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, you could release what I would maybe consider a clunky game and still have it be successful, and people will still enjoy it. People will still play it. I think it just comes down to how broad of an audience you're looking
Yeah.
to achieve with a game design. If you want it to be like viable as a mass market game, it needs to be streamlined, and it needs to be, quickly, more or less, it needs to be enjoyable and polished.
Yes.
If you're looking for more of a niche, small market, you just want to sell a couple copies or give them away as gifts or just have a copy. It doesn't have to be that refined. It can be clunky and a little more, it can be whatever.
Exactly.
But yeah, it can be the game for someone, even if it's just you.
Yeah, I think even as publishers, that's important, because there's a lot of us, especially like with Colossal, we have our evergreens like Western Legends, which is huge. Of course, it's huge. But then we also have smaller games like our even Omen, which is very highly rated on BGG, still a 2-player card game like collection that we have. They're a little bit smaller and not as accessible to anyone, a larger player count, but it still doesn't make it a bad game. And if it is a bad game fundamentally, then that's something that publishers absolutely need to obviously curb at the beginning of that, polishing up process. Because a lot of times when we get games, they don't come ready to go out the door. And you'd be surprised how many of our evergreens, when we started, what the design was to what we realize, okay, but is this publishable? Is this digestible? Is it accessible? Is it something we can mass produce? We have so many amazing pitch proposals that I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible when I go into these meetings, because I will be like, sign, sign, sign. But I have to realize, like, we can't sign everything. And then on top of that, I'm not the best person to make that decision, because I'm going to try to find the beauty in all of them, when really in those meetings, it is about, is this actually feasible to make? And if so, how much time would it cost, the production cost of the game? And I think a lot of times the community forgets that. Like, it's not just us saying yes or no with a red button and 3 X's and you're out. We really do have a lot more to look at, and that all I would love, and I hope this podcast helps maybe show a little bit behind the scenes of a publishing, like my job is marketing, because I think a lot of times people forget we're also just nerds. As I started this interview at the beginning, we're just nerds who play games. It's the same thing. I mean, we're down to listen to feedback and constructive criticism, but it's still, at the end of the day, we have to make some difficult choices, and that all kind of wraps up with what we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. One of my last questions that I have for you is, just talk to me about your roles specifically. And I think, do you have like a personal goal or mission that you're working towards? And if you want to follow it up with, is there anything else you'd want someone to know?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting enough, because when I first started in this industry, I felt like I had the worst imposter syndrome. I felt like no matter how much time of my day I gave to my publishers, it was never going to be enough. When you work remotely, because a lot of our companies, we're still remote. There is no office we go to. We have Slack meetings and Zoom calls every day. I think where I was at the beginning of where I felt like, oh, I'm just a measly little social media manager, to where I am now with the confidence I have as a social media manager or marketing manager or customer service, that's the important part. And I think for me, my growth, I'm really content with where I am in this industry. When it comes to what I do for these publishers, because for a while I would just call myself social media for Colossal. And then I realized, like, no, like I marketing and social media and Kickstarter and customer service and replacement parts. And I package them up in my home office and send them off. Like, if you get a package from me, you're getting sent something from sunny Florida. Like, I take pride in the positions I have, as opposed to looking for like, okay, how can this be better for me? How can I get further in this industry? When I realized where I am in this industry is very impactful and worthy of my time, I I think for my future, I would love to develop a really nice escape room board game. I love the unlocks. I love the exits. Low memory escape tells are just absolutely phenomenal. I would love to throw my hat into that ring, and I think that might be something that you see in the next couple of years, maybe. Um, but yeah, that's my goals. I just keep in mind for anyone listening to this, when you reach out to a publishing company, unless it is your big dogs like Simon, Fantasy Flight, the biggies, you're literally talking to a team of maybe two, three, four people. And I know it may seem like we're these giant corporations who just rake in the money all the time, but there's even reasons that you may see things get delayed by a day based on what we can afford, and I think that's just important and very humbling for us as publishers to know, like, it may not seem like you can resonate with us, but you absolutely can. I mean, we're just trying to put food on the tables for our families too. And I think sometimes that gets lost in translation, that, they see millions of dollars on Kickstarter, but that's not the case always, especially if people knew how much was taken out of that. But I'm not here to drag Kickstarter. Um, but yeah, I just think that's really kind of where I want my voice to stand in this industry, is like, yes, I'm a queer person. I have a husband. I have a partner. They're also in this industry, and you may not be able to resonate with my identity or even maybe the games that I play, but you can resonate on just a human level. And if there's neglect, or you feel like, where's the container for, like, we're also equally just as frustrated and stressed. And especially when we have to admit a fault, that is some of the worst feelings in the world, because the last thing we want anyone to feel in this industry is that they've been taken advantage of. And I know some companies have taken advantage of others, but just trust that when you reach out to any of my companies, that's just not going to be the case.
Yeah, I think this is one of those unique industries where what we produce and sell as designers creates such, intimate emotional experiences when done well, when you get to the table. So people feel very connected to the product that the industry puts out. It's a very emotional experience that people go through,
Yeah.
where they have a ton of fun, they make a lot of connections. So I think it makes sense that we get a lot of emotional comments and feedback around the product and the services they receive. And so I think, because it feels like such a big emotional experience, you'd think there's a big
Yeah.
company behind it, but it's really just a couple people creating these really impactful experiences. So it feels big, but in reality, it's not. It's very small teams doing really
Yeah.
good work.
Yeah, and even if the company is 30 people, a lot of those people are working hard on just development, that you you may not ever get to speak with, but their work is just as important. And I think with the companies that I work for, when I look at Colossal, as much as it's done in the last 3 years, good and bad, of course, I will not hide from Colossal's rocky reputation. I take that with all of the accountability I can. It is, I'm 33% of that now, and that to me is just absolutely wild. Like, I left my oven on the other day. Like, no one should trust me with any of this, and I'm just so humbled and proud that not only have I been given the opportunity to, it does seem like there is a general welcoming of what I do in this industry. And yeah, I can't wait to go back to the cons and see people and get to start getting to the level of some of my colleagues who have been in this industry way longer than I have. And you see them and you're like, oh my gosh, that's like a mini celebrity. So yeah, I just can't wait to be able to interact with more people. And something like this podcast is just so fulfilling, because a lot of times we don't get the opportunity to speak about personal stuff and how it relates to our work as well. And I think if there's anything that we can do to help bridge the gap between customer and publisher, that I'm willing to take forth with pride.
Yeah, it's one of those tricky things where I think the stance of a lot of people. I have a friend who he self-published a game, and he's kind of trying to take a middle of the road stance as a company and not
Mm-hmm.
get super involved in, extremely political discussions, which is
Yeah.
fair. And I
Yeah.
know that I know where he stands personally. Um, but yeah, when you're a public facing person or company, it is really scary. It's almost like not smart to be super political or super polarizing when
Mm-hmm.
um, it seems cowardly, and you shouldn't have to be. And it's a whole thing where you just want to make it about the company and the product. Shouldn't be about you personally. So
Oh,
that's where,
absolutely.
it doesn't need to be like we're making a game where it's about the experience, but we can still make room for these conversations. Like they should
Yeah.
still be happening, when we're at the table, when we get there, when it's not about a it's not about the purchase and the fulfillment. It's about, hey, now we're together as people at a table playing a game, that we can still talk about it.
Yeah, I also think to just piggyback off that for a second, I do think it's important for a lot of companies. I am Pandasaurus's number one fan. And I am part of their fan because they are so brave with what they post on their public facing stuff, standing with, you know, the Asian hate that was coming through, and then the Black Lives Matter and things like that. And I think all that's really important, but something that for my companies that I try to stay at least balanced with is that public facing opinion, and letting people who get to know Brotherwise or get to know Colossal, while we may not stand and publicly denounce things, look at the people who are behind those, follow those people. And if you really want to know what those people believe in, the people who are actually making your games, then if that matters to you, then that's what can kind of curb your opinion on. But I really cannot speak enough about my publishers, and the way that if there has been resistance to ever post something like that, it's been more of something on a personal level, because you feel like for marketing you really do want to show your positive support across the board. But when your page is just about board games, allow that to kind of live separately on your personal pages, which is also very important to note why my personal pages at the very top say my opinions are my own. They do not represent the company as a whole. Please do not get it twisted. I do not have time for that. But I am a person who is queer, and I am a person who, you know, stands by these publishers. So if you are a person who does not agree with queer people, don't buy my games. Don't buy them. I I I don't. There's just nothing else I can say. If that matters to you, if my queerness matters to you, then I can't help you in any way, shape, or form. Convince you otherwise that our games are of incredible quality. Either, you've already made that decision before you've found out of my identity, and if that bothers you, then you're helpless. I can't do anything to that. All I can say is if it does bother you and you're willing to learn with some patience, stop on by my pages, learn a little bit more about me, see what I'm about. But again, please know that my opinions are not going to ever represent the companies I work for.
Yeah. So, wrapping up and going off that, how can people connect with you or follow you, support your endeavors?
Yeah. So, I've got my personal Instagram and Twitter, which is just Lost My Meeples. I was a little bit of a creator before getting into the industry as a professionalist, so I have a nice little following. But I will say I also was voted most opinionated in high school, so I still have a very loud platform on Twitter. But if you just want photos, follow me on Instagram. And also, if I guess that'd probably be about it. I do have lostmymeeples.com, but it's just three little tiny reviews right now. It's something I would love to work more towards. It's just hard as a marketing manager and someone who's front facing on publishers to review other people's games. So I just try to review them in a more lighthearted way. Like, really don't take, it's more entertainment value than anything. And that's just me wanting to have a platform to do that. But really, if you want to get in touch with me, Lost My Meeples on Twitter and Instagram.
Or send a support ticket to Colossal
Yes.
Villains Games.
Yes. And also, if you do follow my personals, please, please, please do not DM me with customer service questions. I promise you, regardless of which publishing company I work for, even if it's me in handling those, I need to reply to those forums. That way I try to separate the two.
Good to know. Okay, well, I have a little disclaimer here at the end, and it's just that I want to remind everyone that we're just two queer folks, and we do not speak for the entire LGBTQIA plus community, nor are we trying to. The best way to be an ally is to keep learning, listening, and just remember that we're all trying to figure this out together. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for listening. Nat, thank you for talking to me, and know that you're loved and perfect just the way you are. Until next time, that's all I got.
Bye. Thank you so much.